She said she needed space, just not enough to realize who would fill it. The words didn't hit me right away. Not because they weren't clear, but because of where she said them. Right there at the table. 5 people sitting around polished wood, half-finished glasses, quiet conversations that instantly died the second Laura spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The way she said it, calm, controlled, almost rehearsed, was worse than shouting. I think I need some space. Maybe even a separation. Just like that. Like she was talking about changing weekend plans. Like I was a minor inconvenience she'd finally decided to address. I remember the way the overhead lights reflected off the glass in front of me, the way my hand paused halfway to picking it up. No one else moved. No one else spoke. Because everyone at that table understood exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a private conversation. This was a statement. A repositioning. And the worst part? She wanted witnesses. I looked at her. Really looked. Not the version of her I had been holding on to, not the version I kept trying to fix, but the one sitting right in front of me. Composed. Certain. Already halfway gone. And then there was Megan. Sitting 2 seats down. Quiet. Watching. Not with the same detached curiosity as the others, not with that subtle judgment people get when they think they're witnessing the end of something messy. No. She was watching me. Like she was trying to understand something no one else at that table even cared to see. I just don't feel the same anymore, Laura added, softer this time, as if that made it kinder. It didn't. It just made it clearer. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision she had already made. And now she was delivering it like a closing argument. I could feel the weight of everyone waiting for me to react. To argue. To defend. To ask questions. To make a scene so they could all justify what they were watching. But I didn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I didn't even ask when she had stopped trying. I just nodded. Slow. Measured. Like I had heard something completely ordinary. And for a split second, something shifted. It was subtle. But it was there. Because that wasn't the reaction she expected. That wasn't the reaction anyone expected. Most people think silence means weakness. They think if you don't fight back, it's because you've already lost. Laura thought that too. I could see it in the way she leaned back slightly, like she had just confirmed something about me. Something she had already believed for a long time. But what she didn't realize, was that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it just means you're paying attention. I picked up my glass. Took a small sip. Set it back down exactly where it had been. Okay, I said. Just that. One word. No emotion. No resistance. And that's when the room changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Because people don't know what to do when the script breaks. Laura blinked. Just once. Like she was recalibrating. Like she needed a second to process why this didn't feel like a win. But she moved on quickly. She always did. That's what people like her do. They move forward. They don't look back. At least, not until they realize something behind them changed. I stood up. Calm. Steady. No rush. No hesitation. You should take all the space you need, I said. And I meant it. Just not in the way she thought. As I walked away from that table, I didn't look back. Not at her. Not at anyone. But I could feel it. That shift. That small, quiet fracture in the moment she thought she controlled. And what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the moment she asked for space, she stopped being the one who decided what happened next. I did not go home right away. Not because I did not have anywhere to go, but because for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the need to rush back to something that was already gone. The drive felt different. Same streets. Same traffic lights. Same turns I had taken 1,000 times before. But everything felt quieter, like the noise I had been living inside of had finally stopped. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was how normal everything looked. Her shoes still by the door. Her jacket still hanging where she always left it. A half-finished mug of coffee sitting on the counter like the morning had never been interrupted. It almost made it easy to pretend nothing had changed. Almost. I set my keys down in the same spot I always did. Slow. Deliberate. Not because I was trying to hold on to routine, but because I was starting to see it for what it really was. Routine had never meant stability. It just meant repetition. And repetition can hide a lot of things if you let it. I walked through each room without turning on any extra lights. Not searching. Just observing. The living room. The couch where we used to sit without talking for hours, calling it comfort. The dining table where conversations had slowly turned into silence long before tonight. The bedroom where distance had stopped being physical and started becoming something harder to explain. That was the part people do not see. Relationships do not break in one moment. They fade. Quietly. Gradually. Until one day, someone finally says it out loud. And everyone acts like it just happened. I sat down on the edge of the bed and leaned forward, resting my hands together. No anger. No panic. Just clarity. Because when you remove the noise, you start to see patterns. The late nights that stopped being explained. The conversations that felt shorter. The way she stopped asking questions she used to care about. It was all there. I just chose not to name it. That was my mistake. Not trusting what I could already feel. I stayed there for a while. Not thinking about her leaving, but realizing she had already left long before she said it. And that changed something. Because you cannot lose something that is already gone. That is when my phone buzzed. A single vibration on the nightstand. I did not reach for it immediately. I let it sit there for a second longer than usual. Then I picked it up. Megan. The name alone was enough to pause. Not because it was unexpected, but because of the timing. I opened the message. Simple. Direct. Are you okay? Most people would read that as concern. But there was something underneath it. Something quieter. Something more aware. She had been at the table. She had seen everything. But more importantly, she had seen what others missed. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not rushing to respond. Not ignoring it either. Just considering. Because moments like this are where things start to shift. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a small change in direction that no one notices until it is too late. I typed back. Short. Controlled. I am fine. I could have said more. Explained. Asked questions. But I did not. Because I was starting to understand something. You do not need to say everything for someone to understand you. And sometimes, the people who say the least, are the ones paying the closest attention. What I did not realize in that moment, was that this message was not the start of something new. It was the continuation of something that had already been quietly building, long before Laura ever asked for space. The next morning did not come with chaos. No loud arguments. No dramatic confrontation. Just absence. Her side of the bed was untouched, exactly the way I had left it the night before. The house felt the same, but something underneath it had shifted. I moved through my routine without thinking. Coffee. Shower. Keys. The same sequence I had followed for years, except this time, there was no weight behind it. No expectation waiting on the other side. At work, nothing changed on the surface. Emails still came in. Meetings still filled the calendar. People still spoke to me the same way they always had. But when you stop carrying something heavy, you start noticing how light everything else feels. I was more focused. More precise. Not because I was trying harder, but because my attention was no longer divided. That was when the second message came. Megan again. Different tone this time. I did not like how that went last night. I read it once. Then again. Not because I did not understand it, but because of what it implied. Most people would have stayed out of it. Kept their distance. Especially someone that close to Laura. But Megan did not. She stepped closer. That told me more than the message itself. I waited a few minutes before responding. Not to play games, but because I had learned something important. Timing reveals intention. I typed slowly. It was not unexpected. That was the truth. Or at least part of it. Her reply came faster this time. Still does not make it right. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. There it was again. Not sympathy. Not curiosity. Something sharper. Something more personal. Megan had always been around. Dinners. Holidays. Casual conversations that never meant much at the time. Or at least that was what I thought. But now, looking back, small details started to rearrange themselves. The way she listened when I spoke, even when others were distracted. The way she noticed things Laura ignored. The way her questions were never surface level. It was subtle. Easy to miss if you were not paying attention. And I had not been. Not until now. "Are you coming by later?" she asked. That one made me pause. Not because of what it meant, but because of how easily it crossed a line most people would not approach. I could have said no. That would have been the expected move. Clean. Simple. Predictable. But I did not feel the need to follow expectations anymore. "Maybe," I replied. No commitment. No rejection. Just enough to keep the door open. The rest of the day moved faster after that. Not because anything changed externally, but because something internal had already shifted. I was not reacting anymore. I was observing. And the more I observed, the clearer everything became. Laura had made her move. Public. Controlled. Final, at least in her mind. But what she did not understand was that actions like that do not just end things. They create space. And space does not stay empty for long. By the time I left the office, the message was still sitting there. Unresolved. Quiet. Waiting. I got into my car and sat there for a moment longer than usual, hands resting on the steering wheel, engine off. Not thinking about what I should do, but recognizing something most people miss. Moments like this do not feel important when they happen. They feel small. Insignificant. Easy to overlook. But later, when everything changes, you realize this was the point where it started. I started the engine. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just moving forward. And what Laura did not realize, was that while she was creating distance, someone else was already stepping into it. I did not go straight home that evening. Instead, I found myself pulling into a quiet parking lot across from a small coffee place we had all been to before. Not together, not intentionally, but close enough that it carried a certain familiarity. The kind of place people go when they want to talk without being noticed. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, watching the soft glow from inside spill out onto the sidewalk. Megan was already there. I could see her through the window, seated near the corner, not on her phone, not distracted, just waiting. That alone told me something. Most people fill silence with noise. She did not. I stepped out of the car and walked in, the small bell above the door giving away my arrival. She looked up immediately, not surprised, just acknowledging. Like she knew I would show up even before I did. "Hey," she said, simple, calm, like nothing about this was unusual. I nodded slightly and took the seat across from her. No awkwardness. No forced small talk. Just a quiet understanding that neither of us needed to pretend this was casual. "I was not sure if you would come," she added after a second. "I was not sure either," I replied. That was the truth. Not because I was conflicted, but because I was aware. Aware of what this looked like. Aware of what it meant. And more importantly, aware of how easily lines get crossed when people think no one is paying attention. A server came by, and I ordered black coffee. She already had hers. Half finished. Still warm. "You handled that differently than I expected," she said, leaning back slightly, studying me in a way that felt more observant than judgmental. "Most people would have reacted." I shrugged lightly. Most people would not have seen it coming. She did not respond right away. Just nodded once, like that confirmed something she had already been thinking. "She has been pulling away for a while," Megan said, her voice lower now, more deliberate. "You know that, right?" I did not answer immediately. Not because I disagreed, but because I wanted to hear how she would say it. People reveal more in how they explain things than in what they actually say. "It was not sudden," she continued. "It just became easier for her to treat you like you were already gone." That landed differently. Not because it was harsh, but because it was precise. There was no emotion in it. Just observation. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence sit for a second longer than necessary. "You seem to know a lot about it," I said. Not accusatory. Just neutral. She met my eyes without hesitation. "I pay attention," she said. Simple. Direct. No apology. No deflection. And that was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone outside the table would notice. But internally, it was clear. Because Megan was not speaking like someone on the outside looking in. She was speaking like someone who had been watching closely for a long time. "Why tell me now?" I asked. That question mattered more than anything else. Timing always does. She smiled slightly, not in a way that softened the moment, but in a way that acknowledged it. "Because now you are finally listening," she said. And there it was. Not sympathy. Not concern. Something else entirely. Something sharper. More intentional. I leaned back slightly, studying her the same way she had been studying me. Because what she was doing was not accidental. And what I was starting to understand, was that this was not just about Laura pulling away. This was about someone else stepping forward. And what Laura did not realize, was that while she thought she was creating distance to find something better, someone much closer had already been closing that distance, one quiet moment at a time. We did not stay long after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because neither of us needed to force anything further. Some conversations are not meant to be stretched. They land, they settle, and they leave something behind that keeps working long after the words are gone. When we stepped outside, the air felt cooler than before, quieter too, like the world had slowed down just enough to let everything catch up. Megan stood beside me for a moment, not rushing to leave, not trying to extend the moment either. Just present. "You are going to be fine," she said, but it did not sound like reassurance. It sounded like a conclusion. I nodded slightly, because she was right, just not in the way most people would mean it. I know, I replied. And I did. Not because everything was solved, but because for the first time, I was not reacting to someone else's decision. I was starting to move on my own terms. We walked to our cars without saying much more. No unnecessary words. No promises. Just a quiet understanding that something had shifted, and neither of us was pretending otherwise. When I got back home, the house felt different again. Not empty this time, just neutral. Like it had stopped holding onto something that no longer belonged there. I placed my keys down and walked into the living room, noticing small things I had ignored before. The way the space was arranged around her preferences. The way everything had been adjusted over time without me even realizing it. It was not control. It was slow replacement. And I had allowed it. That realization did not come with anger. Just clarity. I sat down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment, letting everything settle. Laura had asked for space, but what she really wanted was distance without consequence. She wanted to step away while still holding the option to return. That was the part people do not say out loud. They call it space, but what they mean is control without commitment. What she did not understand was that space works both ways. The moment she stepped back, she gave up the ability to decide what filled that gap. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. Not Megan this time. Laura. I looked at the name on the screen and let it sit there for a few seconds before opening it. We need to talk about how this is going to work. No greeting. No hesitation. Just structure. That was her pattern. Even now, she was trying to define the situation in a way that kept her in control. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I set the phone down and stood up, walking slowly through the house again, but this time with a different perspective. This was no longer something I was trying to hold together. It was something I was already moving beyond. By the time I picked the phone back up, my response was simple. Take the space you asked for. No argument. No negotiation. Just a boundary. Her reply came faster than I expected. That is not what I meant. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. She had expected resistance. She had expected me to push back, to stay engaged, to give her something to manage. But I did not. And that was the moment the dynamic started to change. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But underneath everything, the balance had shifted. Because what Laura did not realize, was that the version of me she thought she could step away from, was already gone. And the space she created, was no longer empty. The next few days did not explode into chaos the way most people expect. There were no dramatic confrontations, no long emotional messages, no sudden attempts to fix everything overnight. Instead, it was quieter than that. Controlled. Almost calculated. Laura did not come back to the house. Not immediately. She sent a few messages, all of them structured the same way. Practical. Detached. Focused on logistics. We should figure out schedules. We need to talk about bills. What are we telling people? Every message was designed to keep the situation organized without ever addressing what actually happened. That told me everything I needed to know. She was not trying to reconnect. She was trying to manage the fallout. And that difference matters more than people realize. I responded the same way each time. Short. Clear. No emotional weight behind it. Not ignoring her, but not engaging beyond what was necessary. Because once you understand the game, you stop reacting to every move. You only respond when it serves a purpose. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Quietly. Consistently. Megan did not flood my phone with messages. She did not try to insert herself into every moment. Instead, she showed up in small, precise ways that were harder to ignore. A message in the morning. Hope today is easier. No follow-up. No pressure. Just enough to be present without demanding anything in return. A few days later, another message. There is a place downtown you might like. You always said you wanted to try something different. She remembered that. Something I had said months ago, maybe longer. Something Laura had never paid attention to. That was the difference. Attention. Not effort. Not performance. Just awareness. And awareness builds something stronger than people expect. I did not rush into anything. That would have been the predictable move. The emotional reaction. The rebound. But this was not that. I was not filling space because I felt empty. I was allowing something to grow because it made sense. That distinction changes everything. One evening, about a week after that dinner, I agreed to meet Megan again. Different place this time. A quiet restaurant on the edge of downtown, the kind of place where conversations stay at your table and nowhere else. When I walked in, she was already there again. Same pattern. Same calm presence. But something had shifted. Not in her, but in the way I saw it. The first time we met, I was observing her. This time, I was recognizing her. You picked a good place, I said as I sat down. She smiled slightly. I listen, she replied. Same tone as before. Same meaning. And again, it landed differently. We talked longer that night. Not about Laura. Not about the separation. Not about what went wrong. That part was already understood without needing to be explained. Instead, we talked about everything else. Work. Plans. Things we had both put aside without realizing it. And the more we talked, the clearer something became. This was not new. Not really. This connection had been there, quietly building, hidden under years of proximity and overlooked moments. The only difference now was that there was space for it to exist. At one point, she paused and looked at me in a way that was more direct than before. You are different, she said. No, I replied calmly. I just stopped pretending. That was the truth. I was not becoming someone new. I was removing everything that had been shaped around someone else's expectations. And when you do that, people who were never really seeing you before, suddenly notice. The night ended without anything dramatic. No grand statements. No forced moments. Just a quiet understanding that we were no longer standing on opposite sides of something undefined. We were moving in the same direction. Slowly. Intentionally. And that made it stronger than anything rushed. As I walked out and headed toward my car, my phone buzzed again. Laura. I did not need to open it immediately to know the tone had changed. And when I finally did, it was exactly what I expected. I think we need to actually talk. This is getting complicated. I stared at the message for a second, then locked my phone without responding. Because what she was calling complicated, was just something she could no longer control. And what Laura still did not understand, was that the space she asked for was no longer something she could step back into whenever she wanted. It had already been filled. Not loudly. Not recklessly. But with something real. And by the time she realized that, it was already too late to define it on her terms. By the second week, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Laura was no longer just sending structured messages. The tone had shifted. Not completely, not in a way she would openly admit, but enough to reveal what was underneath. The messages came more frequently. Less about logistics, more about timing. Are you home tonight? Can we talk in person? I think we are avoiding something important. She was trying to pull the situation back into a space she understood. A space where conversations could be redirected, where outcomes could still be influenced. But what she did not realize was that the dynamic she was relying on no longer existed. I did not rush to answer. Not as a strategy, not as a game, but because I no longer felt the need to prioritize her urgency over my clarity. When I did respond, it was the same as before. Short. Neutral. Controlled. We already said what needed to be said. That was enough. Or at least, it should have been. But people who are used to control do not accept simple endings. They look for openings. And when they cannot find one, they create pressure. That pressure showed up a few days later. I came home earlier than usual that evening. The house was quiet. But not empty this time. Her car was in the driveway. That alone told me she had made a decision without asking. I walked in and found her in the living room, standing exactly where she used to stand when she was waiting for me to notice something. Same posture. Same composed expression. But something underneath it was different. Less certainty. More tension. "We need to talk," she said immediately, as if starting strong would give her control over the conversation. I set my keys down and looked at her for a moment before responding. "You already said what you needed." She shook her head slightly. "That is not what I meant, Ethan. You are acting like this is final." There it was. Not concern. Not regret. Fear of losing control over the outcome. I walked past her and into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water before turning back. No rush. No escalation. "You asked for space," I said calmly. I respected that. "This is not what I meant by space," she replied, her voice tightening just enough to reveal the shift. "Then you should have said what you meant," I answered. "No emotion. Just clarity." She stepped closer, crossing the distance she had created days ago. "You are already moving on," she said, watching me carefully now, like she was trying to confirm something she had not expected to see this soon. I did not deny it. I did not explain it. I just held her gaze long enough for her to understand that I was no longer operating inside her expectations. "You do not get to decide that for me," she added, quieter this time. And that was the moment everything became clear. Not just to me, but to her. Because what she was reacting to was not betrayal. It was the loss of control over a situation she thought she had already defined. I set the glass down slowly. "You decided when you made it public," I said. "You just did not expect me to accept it." She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing to argue against. The reality was already there. Sitting between us. Unavoidable. "Who is she?" she asked finally. Not angry. Not accusing. Just direct. That question carried more weight than anything else she had said. Not because of what it implied, but because of what it confirmed. She knew. Or at least, she felt it. I paused for a second, not because I was unsure, but because timing matters. And then I answered. Someone who was paying attention. I did not need to say more. The silence that followed said everything else. And what Laura did not realize, was that this conversation was not about saving anything. It was about her finally understanding that the version of me she thought she could come back to, no longer existed. She did not respond right away. Not with words. Not with the kind of reaction most people expect. There was no immediate anger, no raised voice, no dramatic accusation. Just silence. But it was not the same silence as before. This one carried weight. The kind that comes when something finally makes sense, but not in a way you can control anymore. Laura took a step back, almost instinctively, like the space she had asked for had suddenly turned into something she could not step out of. "Megan," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, less certain, like she was testing the name more than asking the question. I did not confirm it. I did not deny it either. I just watched her long enough for the answer to settle without needing to be said. Because sometimes, the truth lands harder when it is not handed to you directly. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The kind of shift that only happens when someone realizes they miscalculated something important. That does not make any sense, she said, more to herself than to me. She would not. Her sentence trailed off, not because she did not have the words, but because the reality in front of her did not match the version she had been holding on to. That was the problem with assumptions. They feel solid until they are not. I leaned slightly against the counter, arms relaxed, not defensive, not confrontational. Just present. You were not paying attention, I said calmly. No edge. No accusation. Just a fact. She looked up at me, this time with something closer to frustration. That is not fair, she replied quickly. You do not just move on like this. There it was again. Not anger about what I had done. Discomfort about how it affected her position. I let a second pass before answering. You did not leave me room to stay where I was, I said. You just expected me to stay available. That landed. I could see it in the way her posture shifted again, the way her shoulders tightened slightly, like something inside her was trying to push back but did not have the structure to hold. I needed time, she said, her voice softer now, almost controlled, like she was trying to recalibrate the conversation back into something she could manage. Then you should have taken it without making a statement, I replied. You made it public. That changes what it means. She turned away for a second, running her hand through her hair, not out of panic, but out of frustration. The kind that builds when control starts slipping in ways you did not anticipate. So what now? She asked finally, turning back toward me. That question was different. Not structured. Not planned. Just real. And that was the first honest moment in the entire conversation. I did not answer immediately. Not because I did not know, but because I wanted her to sit in it for a second. The uncertainty. The lack of control. The space she had created now working against her. Now, I said slowly, you take the space you asked for. Simple. Clear. Final. She stared at me for a moment longer, like she was searching for something to hold on to. A reaction. A weakness. Anything that would give her an opening to shift things back. But there was nothing there. Not anymore. The silence stretched between us again, but this time, it did not feel unfinished. It felt resolved. Eventually, she nodded once. Small. Controlled. Like she was accepting something she did not agree with but could not argue against. I did not think it would go like this, she said quietly. I almost smiled, but I did not. Because that was the point. None of this went the way she thought it would. She turned and walked toward the door without saying anything else. No dramatic exit. No last attempt to pull me back into the version of things she understood. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the situation had moved beyond her control. When the door closed behind her, the house felt different again. Not empty. Not tense. Just clear. And what Laura finally realized, was that the space she created was never empty. It was just waiting for someone else to step into it. And by the time she understood that, it was no longer hers to define. The days after that conversation did not come with closure in the way people expect. There was no final argument, no dramatic apology, no moment where everything was neatly explained and resolved. Instead, there was distance. Real distance this time. Not the kind that gets labeled and negotiated, but the kind that simply exists because there is nothing left to hold on to. Laura stopped messaging as often. When she did, it was brief. Necessary. Focused on things that no longer carried emotional weight. Logistics. Paperwork. Timelines. The kind of communication that belongs to people who have already accepted an ending, even if they were not the ones who wanted it to happen this way. I responded the same way I had been. Calm. Direct. Without reopening anything that had already been closed. Because once something becomes clear, going back to confusion is a choice. And I was no longer interested in choosing that. Megan, on the other hand, did not rush anything forward. That was what made it different. There was no pressure to define what we were doing. No need to label it, explain it, or justify it. We spent time together in ways that felt simple, almost understated. Coffee in the morning before work. A quiet dinner that did not need to turn into anything more than conversation. Walks where silence did not feel like something to fill. It was not intense. It was not overwhelming. It was steady. And that steadiness mattered more than anything else. One evening, we were sitting outside a small place just off Main Street, the kind of spot where the lights stay warm and the noise never gets too loud. She looked at me for a moment, the same way she had that first night, observant, calm, but this time with something softer underneath it. "You do not seem like someone who rushes into things," she said. I shook my head slightly. "I do not rush into what I understand," I replied. She nodded, like that answer fit into something she had already been noticing. "And now?" she asked. That question was different. Not about the past. Not about Laura. Just about what came next. I took a second before answering, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the answer to be exact. "Now I do not need to rush at all," I said. And that was the truth. There was no urgency anymore. No need to prove anything, fix anything, or chase something that was already leaving. That part of my life had ended the moment it stopped being real. Everything after that was just time catching up. Megan smiled slightly, not because of what I said, but because she understood what I meant. And that was the difference. Understanding without explanation. Attention without effort. Presence without pressure. Weeks later, the house no longer felt like something shared. It felt like something reclaimed. Not in a dramatic way, not like I had taken something back, but like I had finally removed everything that did not belong to me anymore. The space was mine again. Clear. Uncomplicated. Exactly the way it should have been all along. Laura had moved on in her own way. New routines. New spaces. The same pattern, just in a different direction. I did not follow it. I did not question it. Because what she chose after me was no longer something I needed to understand. The only thing that mattered was what I chose next. And that choice was simple. I did not go back. Not to the version of her I thought I knew. Not to the version of myself that stayed longer than he should have. I moved forward. Quietly. Without needing to prove that it was the right decision. Because when something is right, it does not need to be explained. It just needs to be lived. And what Laura never expected, was that the space she asked for would not bring me back to her. It would lead me somewhere she could no longer reach.